Daniel had always believed he could read people the moment they walked into a room. Years of teaching at music conservatories, working with young hopefuls and judging national competitions had sharpened that instinct. He'd seen hundreds of students who thought they had what it took. Most didn't. To him, talent was rare and real passion even rarer. That morning, as he adjusted the piano bench and straightened the sheet music, he wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. The rehearsal room smelled faintly of polish and wood. Sunlight poured through tall windows, making the black surface of the Bösendorfer grand piano shine like glass. Daniel loved mornings like this, quiet, focused, predictable. Then the door opened softly and a young woman stepped inside. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her long hair was tied loosely, her hands clutching a worn folder to her chest. She wore simple clothes. Nothing about her shouted artist. Her shoes squeaked lightly on the polished floor as she crossed the room. Daniel watched her carefully, not unkindly, but with the practiced eyes of a teacher who had already formed an opinion before a word was spoken. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Good morning," he replied curtly. "You're Lily, correct? The new student from the community program?" She nodded, smiling nervously. "Yes, sir. Thank you for letting me join." Daniel gestured to the piano bench. "We'll see if there's something to work with." His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't warm either. Years of dealing with overconfident amateurs had made him guarded. He'd been through too many sessions where enthusiasm collapsed into off-key attempts and nervous laughter. As Lily settled onto the bench, she glanced around the room, taking in the gleaming piano, the high ceiling, and the faint echo of her own heartbeat in her ears. She had dreamed of this moment for months. But now that she was here under the gaze of the man everyone called a genius, she felt small. Daniel opened his notebook. "Let's start with scales," he said. "C major." Nice and steady, she nodded and began to play. Her hands trembled at first, but as the familiar notes filled the room, her movements grew smoother. Daniel listened with half an ear, jotting down notes. Her technique wasn't perfect. Her timing slipped. Her posture was tense. But there was something in the way she pressed each key. A kind of care, a quiet respect for the sound. Still, he wasn't convinced. He had heard careful before. It wasn't enough. "Stop," he said gently but firmly. "You need to relax your shoulders. You're playing like you're afraid the piano will bite." She blushed, nodding quickly. "Sorry, I've never played on a piano this big before." That made Daniel pause. He glanced up from his notes for the first time and studied her expression. There was no hint of sarcasm or defense, only honesty. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was genuinely grateful to be there. He sighed, leaning back slightly. "You've practiced on uprights, I assume?" "Yes," she said. "An old one at my aunt's house. Some keys don't work." That tugged at something deep in him, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't let sympathy cloud his judgment. "Well," he said, standing, "this one works fine. Let's try something from your folder." Lily hesitated, opening the folder with shaky fingers. Inside were handwritten sheets slightly crumpled at the edges. She had copied the notes by hand because she couldn't afford printed scores. When she handed one to him, he frowned slightly, not at her, but at the effort he could see in every penciled note. "What is this?" he asked. "A song I've been working on," she said softly. "It's not finished, but I wanted to show you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You wrote it?" She nodded again. He almost smiled, not out of amusement but habit. Everyone wrote songs these days. Everyone believed they had a story to tell through music. "All right," he said, motioning for her to start. "Let's hear it." As she prepared, he turned slightly toward the piano, adjusting his glasses. He didn't expect much. Maybe a few sweet notes, a nervous voice, something forgettable. But there was something different in the way she inhaled, a deep, steady breath that quieted even the hum of the room. He noticed it, the stillness before sound. It was the mark of someone who felt the music before they played it. Still, he reminded himself, don't jump to conclusions. While she prepared, Daniel thought about the years that had hardened him. He'd once been idealistic too, once believed every student could be transformed with enough patience. But time, disappointment, and failed auditions had turned that belief into guarded realism. Now he protected his energy, saved his enthusiasm for those who had already proven themselves. Lily, to him, didn't seem like one of those people. She seemed fragile, the kind of student who'd give up after the first harsh critique. He'd seen it before, bright faces fading when the world didn't applaud. Yet as she lifted her head slightly, he caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Not pride, but determination. She was nervous, yes, but beneath that, there was quiet fire. Daniel folded his arms, expression unreadable. "Whenever you're ready," he said. She pressed the first key, and though it was only a warm-up chord, something about it caught his attention. A softness mixed with intent. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. He frowned, not in disapproval, but in curiosity. Maybe there's something here, he thought briefly before shaking the idea away. To him, this was just another morning, another student, another lesson. He didn't know that within the next few minutes, everything he believed about talent and about music was going to change. For now, he was still the skeptical maestro, standing behind a grand piano, unaware that the quiet young woman sitting before him was about to shake the world he thought he understood. The rehearsal room buzzed with a faint hum, not from noise, but from expectation. The faint creak of the piano bench, the shuffle of sheet music, the sound of breathing, all of it mixed in the air like the start of a storm that no one saw coming. Lily sat at the grand piano, her fingers resting just above the keys. The smooth surface felt cool under her skin, the ivory edges slightly worn from years of use. This was the kind of piano she'd only ever seen in pictures, shining under concert hall lights, touched by hands far more skilled than hers. Across from her, Daniel stood near the window, watching silently. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, missed nothing. He had seen hundreds of students before. Some came in loud, talking about their passion as if it were a medal. Others came in trembling, apologizing for every wrong note. He had learned to spot which ones would stay and which would vanish after a few hard lessons. And if he was being honest, he had already put Lily in the second category. She looked too gentle, too quiet. Her voice had the softness of someone afraid of being heard. Daniel didn't dislike her, he simply didn't expect much. In his world, the ones who made it were fierce, hungry, unshakable. And Lily, sitting there in her plain clothes and humble manner, didn't look like she could stand the weight of a stage light, let alone the pressure of performance. "Whenever you're ready," he said again, his tone even. Lily nodded. She could feel her heart pounding so loudly she worried it might echo in the room. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the keys, and she exhaled slowly. Once, then twice, the way she'd taught herself to calm down when nerves struck. Then she began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper testing its strength. But gradually her touch found confidence. The melody she had written was simple, delicate, like sunlight through a curtain. It wasn't grand or complicated, but it had something else. Honesty. Daniel leaned closer, tilting his head slightly. He didn't expect what he was hearing. Her rhythm wasn't perfect, but there was emotion in every sound. She played as though the piano was an old friend, as though every key carried a story. When she began to sing, the transformation was complete. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had a softness that drew the listener in instead of pushing them back. There was something raw in it, fragile yet unbreakable, like glass that could bend light. The lyrics were her own, a story about loss and hope, about searching for something you're afraid to find. Daniel felt a strange stirring inside him. He didn't move, but his hands, resting on the edge of the piano, tightened unconsciously. This wasn't what he expected. There was no arrogance, no performance mask, just pure, unfiltered feeling. Lily's eyes remained closed as she sang. In her mind, she wasn't in a classroom anymore. She was back in her aunt's living room, where she used to play on the old upright piano with chipped keys and a single broken pedal. She remembered the sound of rain on the window, the warmth of her aunt's voice encouraging her to keep practicing even when her fingers hurt. She sang because she couldn't not sing. When the final note faded, the room was silent. The kind of silence that doesn't happen by accident. The kind that happens when something beautiful ends and no one wants to break it. Lily slowly opened her eyes. Daniel was still staring at her, expression unreadable. "Was that okay?" she asked quietly. He blinked as if waking from a dream. "You wrote that?" She nodded, unsure what to say. He didn't respond for a long moment. Instead, he turned back to his notebook, flipping through the pages without really seeing them. He wasn't ready to admit what he was thinking, that the song, simple as it was, had touched something inside him he thought he'd buried. Finally, he said, "It's rough. The phrasing could use work. You need to control your breathing more." But he stopped, choosing his words carefully. "There's something there." Lily's heart leapt at those words. Something there. It wasn't high praise, but coming from Daniel, it was everything. As she packed her music folder, he watched her again, noticing things he hadn't before. The way she handled her sheet music like it was precious. The way her hand still shook slightly, and yet beneath it all a quiet strength. After she left, Daniel sat back at the piano. He stared at the keys, remembering the melody she had played. Without meaning to, he pressed one, then another, until the first few notes of her song echoed again. It was haunting. He hadn't felt this way in years. Not since before the competitions, before the endless judging and the rehearsed perfection. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped feeling music. He analyzed it, taught it, perfected it, but didn't feel it. Lily, the amateur, had reminded him what that felt like. He smiled slightly, shaking his head. An amateur, he muttered to himself. Right, but the truth was her song had stayed with him. The melody replayed in his mind as he closed the piano lid. It wasn't about flawless notes or textbook technique. It was about something he couldn't define. Something real. The next morning, when he walked into the same room, Daniel found himself listening for her voice in the air, as if it had left a trace behind. He sat at the piano, placed his hands on the keys, and realized he was curious, genuinely curious, about what she would do next. For the first time in a long while, Daniel wasn't the man who knew everything. He was the man who wanted to learn, from her. And though neither of them knew it yet, that small spark of curiosity was about to change both of their lives forever. Lily arrived early the next morning, long before the rest of the students. The hall was still empty, filled only with the faint smell of varnished wood and the quiet hum of the city outside. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, drawing soft golden stripes across the floor. She placed her folder on the piano and sat down, her hands resting gently on her lap. She hadn't slept much the night before. Daniel's comment, "There's something there," kept replaying in her mind. It wasn't glowing praise, but to her it meant hope. Someone like him had seen something in her, even if it was just a flicker. That was enough to keep her awake, humming her melody under her breath until sunrise. Now sitting before the grand piano, she closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. The silence of the room wrapped around her like a calm wave. She wasn't just nervous, she was terrified. She wanted to prove that she belonged here, that her song wasn't a lucky moment, that her voice wasn't a coincidence. The piano waited, patient and gleaming as if watching her. Daniel entered a few minutes later, his footsteps echoing lightly against the wooden floor. He looked different today, less stern, though his expression still carried the quiet authority of someone used to control. He carried a mug of black coffee, steam curling above it, and nodded at her. "Early," he said. "I wanted to practice a bit before everyone came," she replied, her voice soft but steady. He gave a brief smile, setting his mug down on the piano lid. "Good. Practice makes less noise later," she laughed nervously. It was the closest thing to a joke she'd ever heard him say. He sat beside the piano, flipping through her folder again. "We'll go over the same song," he said. "But this time don't just play it. Feel it, you understand?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure she did, not fully. Feeling it, to Daniel, wasn't about smiling or crying. It was about truth. About believing every word and every note so deeply that even silence between phrases meant something. He gestured for her to begin. Lily took another breath. Her hands trembled slightly, and she hated that he could probably see it. She pressed the first note, a soft, careful sound, and let it fade before beginning the melody. The music rose slowly, like a small bird testing its wings. Her voice joined in, fragile at first, but then it started to steady, flowing into the rhythm Daniel set with his subtle tapping on the piano edge. This time, Daniel didn't just listen, he watched. Every movement, every hesitation. He noticed how her shoulders tensed before every key change, how she bit her lip between verses, how her eyes flickered shut right before the high note. But more than that, he noticed the emotion. There was a strange purity in her performance. No act, no calculation. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply telling a story through sound. He found himself thinking back to his younger years when he'd first started teaching. He had once believed that music could heal anything: heartbreak, loneliness, grief. Over time, that belief had dulled under the weight of expectations and competitions. Music had become work, a job, not a heartbeat. But watching Lily sing, he remembered, there was something haunting in her tone. Not the kind of sadness that seeks pity, but the kind that carries memory. The quiet ache of someone who has loved and lost, yet still dares to hope. When she reached the final chorus, Daniel unconsciously leaned forward. The note she hit wasn't perfect. It wavered, just slightly, but it carried more power than any flawless performance he'd heard in years. Then came the silence. She stopped playing and waited, her eyes still closed. The echo of her voice lingered in the air, almost like it didn't want to leave. Daniel didn't speak immediately. He just sat there staring at the piano keys as if the answer to something lay hidden between them. Finally, he said softly, "Again." Lily blinked in surprise. "Again?" He nodded. "You weren't ready the first time. You were still afraid. This time, stop being afraid," she hesitated. "Afraid of what?" He met her gaze. "Of being good." Something in his tone made her heart skip. She nodded slowly and began again. The second time was different. She didn't hold back. Her voice rose and cracked in places, but it was full, unguarded, alive. It filled the room, bouncing off the walls, spilling into every corner. Daniel could feel it in his chest. It wasn't perfect. It was real. When she finished, he exhaled, a sound that was almost a sigh. Lily looked up, uncertain. "Better?" Daniel stood, walked to the piano, and closed the lid gently. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You have something," he said at last. "Something you can't teach." Her breath caught. I mean, he interrupted. "You're raw, but raw can be shaped. Raw can move people." He turned away, picking up his coffee again. "Come tomorrow. Same time." As he walked out, Lily sat frozen for a moment, his words sinking in. Her hands were still trembling, but not from fear this time. From excitement. When the door closed behind him, she smiled to herself. The piano still hummed faintly as though it had absorbed her song. For the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. And for Daniel, though he wouldn't admit it out loud, something in him had shifted too. The walls of pride and distance he'd built over the years had begun to crack, all because of one girl with a trembling voice and a song that refused to leave his mind. Outside, the city stirred to life. Inside, in that quiet rehearsal room, a story had started. One built not from perfection, but from courage. Neither of them knew it yet. But this was the beginning of a bond that would test their fears, heal old wounds, and redefine what music truly meant. Lily stood in front of the piano, her palms slightly damp, her breath uneven. The room was silent, and that deep kind of silence that feels almost alive. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing inside her chest. Today was the day Daniel had decided to test her in front of the others. The rehearsal hall was bigger than usual, sunlight pouring through the high windows, painting long stripes across the wooden floor. A few students were seated in the back, whispering softly, glancing at Lily with polite curiosity. Daniel sat at the piano, his hands resting on the keys, expression unreadable. He looked calm, but inside he was uneasy. He had invited her to perform her piece during the group session. Part of him wanted to challenge her, to see if her voice still carried that strange magic under pressure. Another part of him, though he'd never admit it, wanted to see if what he'd heard before hadn't just been a trick of emotion. Lily stood still, clutching her sheet of music, though she knew she wouldn't need it. Her song was etched into her memory like breath itself. Still, her fingers fidgeted nervously around the paper's edge. Daniel cleared his throat. "Whenever you're ready." She nodded, walked to the piano, and placed the sheet gently on the stand. Daniel's eyes followed her quietly, not as a judge now, but as someone waiting for something he couldn't name. Her lips parted slightly. She took one deep breath. "And then," she began. The first note left her lips like light breaking through cloud. It wasn't loud, but it filled the entire room. There was something strange in it, a softness that carried power. a trembling honesty that drew everyone in. Conversations stopped. Chairs creaked as people straightened. Daniel's fingers froze on the keys halfway to playing. The air itself seemed to change. Her voice wove through the melody like silk, each word wrapping emotion around the room. It was as if every note came from somewhere deeper than her lungs, from somewhere inside her soul. Daniel's mind went blank. He forgot the sheet music in front of him, forgot the lesson plan, forgot the line between teacher and student. For a long moment he just sat there staring, listening, unable to move, staring, listening, unable to move. He had heard hundreds of voices in his life, polished, trained, technically flawless. But this was different. Her tone wasn't perfect, not by classical standards, but it was alive. It carried something no amount of training could ever teach: truth. As she sang, Lily felt something she hadn't felt before. The fear began to melt away. The more she sang, the lighter she felt. It was as though the music itself carried her. Every note was a piece of her story. The nights she practiced alone, the losses she never spoke of, the small dreams she'd tucked away because they felt too big for her. Daniel finally began to play, his hands trembling as they touched the keys. The piano followed her voice. Not leading, not controlling, just following, as though it had finally found its purpose. And then came that moment. The one Daniel would remember for years. Her voice lifted into the bridge, that soaring, heart-wrenching part of the song, and Daniel felt his chest tighten. He recognized it. It was the melody he had written years ago, hidden away in a notebook he thought no one had ever seen. A song he had written after losing someone he loved deeply. He froze. His heart skipped. She didn't know, she couldn't know that she was singing his song. But she was. The same melody, the same longing. Only this time it wasn't filled with pain. It was filled with light. His hands shook as he played. He had written that piece out of grief, yet hearing it now through her voice, it sounded like healing. It was as if she had taken his sorrow and turned it into hope. When the song reached its final note, Lily's voice held the sound in the air for a heartbeat longer, and then silence. Complete, breathtaking silence. No one moved. The students in the back sat frozen, their mouths slightly open, their eyes wide. Even the sunlight through the windows seemed to pause. Lily lowered her gaze, not daring to look up. Her hands were trembling and she could barely breathe. She thought she had messed up. Maybe she'd sung too softly, or maybe Daniel hated it, but Daniel, he couldn't speak. His fingers still hovered above the keys, unmoving. His eyes glistened, but he blinked quickly, forcing the feeling away. Finally, he whispered almost to himself, Where did you hear that melody?" Lily looked up, confused. "I found it online," she said softly. "An old instrumental. It didn't have a name, so I wrote lyrics to it. I didn't think anyone would recognize it." Daniel swallowed hard. "That was mine." She froze. "Yours?" He nodded slowly. "I wrote it years ago." Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" But he shook his head, interrupting. "No, don't apologize." His voice was rougher than usual, low and strained. "You gave it life again." He stood up suddenly, walked to the window, and stared out, trying to collect himself. His reflection on the glass looked older than he remembered, tired but somehow lighter. Behind him, Lily stood in silence, not sure what to do. After a long moment, Daniel turned back. His expression had softened, but his eyes were still intense. "You have no idea what you just did," he said quietly. "You reminded me why I started." She blinked, unsure what to say. "Started what?" "Music," he said simply. The room remained quiet after that. But it wasn't the kind of silence that came from emptiness. It was the kind that came after something important had been said, something neither of them would forget. Daniel sat back down at the piano. "Lily," he said gently, "come back tomorrow. We have work to do." She nodded, still stunned, and as she turned to leave, she caught sight of his reflection in the piano lid. For the first time, he wasn't just a teacher. He looked human, and as she walked out, the final echo of her song lingered, soft, haunting, alive, like the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. Daniel sat alone in the rehearsal room long after everyone had left. The lights were dim now, the air still carrying traces of Lily's voice. Her song, his song, still echoed faintly in his head. Every note seemed to follow him, clinging to the corners of the room like a ghost that refused to leave. He ran his hand slowly across the piano lid, his fingertips tracing the polished surface. It was the same instrument he had played for years, yet it felt different tonight. Warmer, alive. It had been almost a decade since he had last played that melody. He'd written it during one of the darkest periods of his life, a time when he believed music had failed him. Back then he was a young composer, full of dreams and arrogance. He thought love and art would last forever, but life had other plans. Her name was Elena. She had been his muse, his critic, his audience of one. She'd believed in him when no one else did. They met at a recital, and she was a singer, he a pianist. Together, they created songs that spoke of fire and light, of sorrow and joy. Until the accident, Daniel had never spoken of it since. Not to students, not to friends, not even to himself. After she was gone, he stopped performing. He poured his grief into one last composition, a song that carried her laughter, her voice, her absence. When it was finished, he couldn't bear to hear it again. He tucked the sheet away, unpublished, unheard. Yet somehow, years later, that same melody had found its way to Lily. He didn't know how. Maybe someone had recorded it. Maybe it had slipped online through an old archive. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that she had taken something born of pain and turned it into something beautiful. He leaned forward, pressing a single key, the same opening note she had sung that morning. The sound was soft, trembling. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he could almost see Elena again, her smile, the way she used to rest her chin on his shoulder while he played. "Still haunting me, aren't you?" He whispered to the empty room. The door creaked softly, and Lily's voice broke the silence. "Sir?" He turned quickly. She stood at the doorway, hesitant, her folder clutched to her chest. Her expression was uncertain, as though she'd interrupted something sacred. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said quickly. "I just forgot my notebook." He gestured toward the piano bench. "It's fine. Come in." She stepped inside quietly, retrieving the small notebook she had left behind. But her eyes lingered on him. The way he sat with his shoulders heavy, the way his fingers rested on the piano as if holding a memory. "Was that song really yours?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes, I wrote it a long time ago." "It's beautiful," she said. "I didn't know. I just found the melody and it felt like it had a story, so I wrote lyrics to it." Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes were distant. "It does have a story." He didn't elaborate. But something in his voice told her it wasn't a happy one. Lily hesitated, then said, "You must have loved her very much." Daniel looked up, surprised. For a moment he said nothing. Then he gave a slow nod. "I did." Lily didn't press further. Instead, she sat on the bench beside him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to bring up old pain." He shook his head. "No, Lily, don't apologize. You didn't bring it up. You brought it back to life." She looked at him, unsure what he meant. He continued, his voice low but steady. "When I wrote that song, it was full of grief. But when you sang it, I didn't hear grief. I heard hope. You turned something broken into something whole." Her throat tightened. "I just sang what I felt." He smiled again, this time genuinely. That's why it worked. They sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken emotion. The piano stood between them, a bridge made of wood and sound and memory. After a while, Lily asked softly, "Do you still write music?" Daniel hesitated. "Not anymore, I teach. It's easier that way." She tilted her head. "Easier doesn't always mean better." He chuckled, surprised by her courage. "You're wiser than you look," she smiled shyly. "My aunt used to say that." Daniel looked at her curiously. "She taught you to play?" Lily nodded. "She couldn't afford lessons for me, so she taught me what little she knew. We used to play together on an old piano with missing keys. She said if I could make that sound good, I could make anything sound good." There was warmth in her voice when she spoke of her aunt, the same warmth that had filled her song. Daniel listened, something stirring inside him again. He realized that maybe music wasn't about perfection or fame or applause. It was about people like Lily, who played not for recognition but because the music was a part of them. He looked at her and said quietly, "Lily, would you like to learn how to finish that song properly?" Her eyes widened. "You mean?" "Yes," he said. "We'll finish it together." Her smile was small but radiant. "I'd like that." Daniel nodded, standing up and stretching his stiff shoulders. "Good. Tomorrow we start from the bridge. The emotion is right. Now we'll give it structure. As she left the room, Lily looked back once more. Daniel was still at the piano, his hands resting gently on the keys. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked peaceful. When the door closed behind her, Daniel began to play again. The melody drifted through the quiet hall, soft and trembling, but this time it didn't sound like a farewell. It sounded like forgiveness. And for the first time in years, Daniel realized that the song he had written for someone he lost was now helping him find someone new, a student. Yes, but also a reminder that the heart never truly forgets how to feel. That night, as he locked the studio and walked into the cool evening air, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The next few days unfolded like a quiet miracle neither of them had expected. Every morning Lily arrived early, her small notebook tucked under her arm, her hair tied back, eyes full of quiet determination. And every morning Daniel was already there, sitting by the piano, pretending to read sheet music though. Truthfully, he was waiting for her. There was a new rhythm between them now, not just of teacher and student, but of two souls rediscovering music for different reasons. For Lily, it was about becoming better. For Daniel, it was about remembering why he loved the art in the first place. The rehearsal room had changed too. Where once it had felt formal and cold, it now seemed brighter, warmer, as if the walls themselves had started to listen. The first few days were filled with corrections, repetitions, and gentle scolding. Daniel was strict, sometimes frustratingly so, but Lily never complained. She absorbed every word, every gesture. Yet beneath that routine, something subtle had shifted. One morning, as Daniel adjusted the sheet stand, he said, "Again, from the second verse. Don't think. Just feel the breath before the note." Lily nodded and began to sing. Her voice filled the air, soft at first, then stronger, more confident. The piano followed her easily, Daniel's fingers gliding effortlessly. His gaze locked on her. But this time something unexpected happened. Halfway through the song, their eyes met just for a second more and the music changed. It wasn't about teacher and student anymore. It was about connection. Her tone grew deeper. His tempo softened instinctively to follow her rhythm. It was as though the two of them were having a conversation without words, one made only of sound and emotion. When the last note faded, neither spoke. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost surprised by how he felt. There was warmth in his chest, a feeling that was both strange and familiar. He had always loved the piano, but this was different. This was alive. Lily smiled nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" He shook his head, still caught in the moment. "No," he said quietly. "You did something very right." She laughed softly. "That's rare praise from you." "Don't get used to it," he replied with a smirk, but his tone was lighter than usual. They went through the song again and again, each time a little different. Some days were full of laughter when she hit the wrong notes. Other days were silent and focused. But every time they played, something grew between them. Trust. One evening, after everyone else had gone, Lily stayed behind to practice one last time. Daniel lingered near the window, pretending to review some papers but really listening. Her voice drifted through the room, lower this time, softer, full of emotion. The light from the window fell across her face, highlighting the concentration in her eyes. There was something raw, unfiltered, about the way she sang when she thought no one was watching. And Daniel, the once skeptical maestro, found himself moved to the point of stillness. He didn't understand it completely. Maybe it was her honesty, maybe it was the way she carried emotion in every syllable, but he realized that she wasn't singing for approval. She was singing for herself, and that, he thought, was what real artistry looked like. When she finished, she turned and caught him watching. "Oh, sorry," she said, embarrassed. "I didn't know you were still here." He smiled faintly. "If I'd left, I would have missed that." Her cheeks flushed. "It wasn't perfect." "No," he said softly. "It was better than perfect." There was a long pause. The sunlight had dimmed into orange glow. Dust floated lazily in the air, and for a moment everything felt suspended in time. Lily finally broke the silence. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, I thought you didn't like me." Daniel chuckled. "I didn't," she laughed. "Honest. I thought you were just another hopeful amateur," he admitted. You walked in with that shy voice clutching your music like it might bite you. I misjudged you. She looked at him curiously. What changed? He paused, glancing toward the piano. You did. Her smile softened, and for a second her eyes glimmered. She didn't need to ask what he meant. There was something unspoken between them now. Not romantic, not yet, but deeply human. A bond formed through shared silence, shared creation, shared pain. As the last rays of sunset painted the piano gold, Daniel closed his notebook and said, That's enough for today. Lily hesitated. Can I ask you something before I go? Of course. Why did you stop composing? She asked gently. He froze for a moment, then looked away. Because it hurt too much. Her voice softened. And now? He looked back at her, and for the first time there was a hint of a smile that reached his eyes. Now, he said, it's starting to hurt a little less. Lily nodded slowly. Then maybe that means you should start again. Her words lingered long after she left. Daniel sat at the piano thinking. The idea felt impossible, composing again after all these years. Yet something in him had started to stir. He touched the keys softly, replaying the melody they'd been working on. But this time it was different. New notes came to him, fresh phrases, small variations that seemed to belong there all along. He smiled faintly. Maybe you're right, he murmured to the empty room. And for the first time in years, Daniel wrote again. Not for fame, not for critics, but because Lily's voice had reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Music wasn't about perfection. It was about connection, about truth, about being alive. By the time he finished scribbling the last note, the room was dark except for the faint glow of a lamp. Outside, the city slept, but inside the small studio, 2 lives had already begun to change, one rediscovering her strength, and the other rediscovering his purpose. Daniel leaned back, staring at the fresh ink on the page, and whispered to himself, almost as if saying it out loud would make it real. She made me remember. The day of the recital arrived quietly, too quietly for Lily's pounding heart. She had barely slept, her mind replaying every note, every breath, every correction Daniel had ever given her. The grand stage of the conservatory felt both like a dream and a test she wasn't sure she could pass. The hall was huge, glowing under golden lights. The polished wooden floor reflected everything. The gleam of the piano, the shimmer of the microphones, the faint shadow of the velvet curtains swaying softly in the air-conditioned breeze. The seats filled slowly, the low hum of conversations mixing with the soft sound of instruments being tuned. Lily stood backstage, clutching her small sheet of music, even though she didn't need it anymore. Her stomach twisted with nerves. She peeked through the curtain and froze. Daniel was there, seated at the piano in his black suit, calm as ever. His back was straight, his hands resting gently on the keys. But she noticed something different today, his expression. It wasn't the sharp, unreadable look of the maestro she first met. It was softer, proud, encouraging. Their eyes met across the room. He didn't smile, not fully, but he gave a small nod, the kind that said, "You're ready." That was enough. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lily Moore, accompanied by Maestro Daniel Hayes." Her breath caught. The applause that followed felt miles away. She stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking softly, her heart racing. The lights were bright, blinding at first, we own. But when she saw the grand piano, her nerves quieted. It was familiar. It was home, Daniel whispered as she took her place beside him. "Breathe," she nodded. He played the opening chords, gentle, steady, the same ones that had started everything between them. The first sound spread through the hall like a ripple of calm water. And then, when her cue came, Lily opened her mouth and sang. The first note soared, pure, unshaken. It hung in the air like light spilling across glass. The audience went still. Even those who had come for other performers turned their attention toward her. It was the same magic Daniel had felt that first day, only stronger now. Her voice was confident, full of feeling, no longer afraid of breaking. Each verse carried the story of everything she had lived. The long nights of doubt, the hope she clung to, the teacher who had believed in her. She didn't just sing, she told. Every note was truth, every breath emotion. Daniel played as though he were part of her, not leading, not following, but blending perfectly. He had accompanied hundreds of singers in his career, but this was different. This was the first time he felt like he wasn't just playing music. He was feeling it. When they reached the bridge, something shifted. Lily looked at him briefly and he saw it. The same spark that had once lived in Elena's eyes, the one he thought he'd never see again. But this time it wasn't tied to loss. It was tied to rebirth. Her voice rose higher, filled with power and tenderness. Daniel's heart tightened. The memory of Elena's accident flickered briefly, but instead of the pain he once felt, he found peace. It was as if Lily's voice was giving him permission to let go, to stop mourning and start remembering with warmth. Mourning and start remembering with warmth. The audience didn't breathe. The last part of the song came, the final note, the one they had practiced again and again. Daniel slowed the piano, letting the sound bloom beneath her voice. Lily closed her eyes, lifted her chin slightly, and let the final note leave her lips. It was long and clear, full of emotion, carrying everything she was. For a moment it didn't sound human. It sounded eternal. Then Wayner, silence. A silence so deep that even Daniel felt goosebumps rise along his arms. The note seemed to hover in the air even after it was gone. Lily stood perfectly still, afraid to move. She thought maybe she'd done something wrong. Maybe the silence meant they hadn't liked it. But then, like a wave breaking free, the applause began. It started softly, one pair of hands and then another. Then all at once, the hall erupted in thunderous clapping and cheers. People stood. Some whistled. Others simply smiled, lost in awe. Lily gasped, her hands trembling. Tears welled in her eyes. She turned toward Daniel and froze again. He wasn't clapping. He was looking at her. His eyes were glistening, not with pride, but with something deeper. Gratitude. He stood, closing the piano lid gently, and turned to her. Without saying a word, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture few ever saw from him. Respect. Lily blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. As the applause continued, she stepped closer to him and whispered, "Was it okay?" Daniel gave a small, shaky laugh. "Lily," he said softly, "you didn't just sing. You brought her back." She didn't understand at first, but she saw it in his face. The peace, the release. For him, that final note wasn't just a performance. It was closure. When they left the stage, Daniel walked beside her in silence. The hallways echoed with the fading sound of applause. At the exit, he stopped and turned to her. "You changed the way I hear music," he said quietly. "And maybe the way I see life." Lily smiled through tears. "You changed mine too." For a long moment, they just stood there, the old maestro and the once timid student. Two lives woven together by one song. When she finally left, Daniel returned to the empty stage. The lights were dim now, the seats empty. He sat at the piano, touched the keys once more, and smiled. The melody that had once been born from grief now lived again. Not as sorrow, but as light. He whispered to the quiet room. "She did it, Elena, she really did." Then gently, he played the final note once more. Soft, peaceful, perfect, and this time, when the sound faded, he didn't feel loss. The night after the recital, the city was alive with soft lights and the hum of late conversations. But in Daniel's quiet apartment, the world was still. The window was open just enough to let in the cool breeze, carrying the faint sound of distant traffic. On his piano sat a single flower, a white lily. No note, no ribbon, just the flower itself. He knew exactly who had left it. Daniel smiled faintly. He sat down at the piano, his reflection flickering in the polished surface. For the first time in years, he didn't feel tired. He didn't feel empty. Instead, there was a calm warmth in his chest, the kind of peace that comes after a storm has finally passed. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. Slowly, gently, the melody that once symbolized pain now felt like rebirth. It was no longer just his song. It belonged to both of them, to the teacher who had stopped believing and the student who had reminded him why he should. Meanwhile, across the city, Lily sat on her aunt's old couch, her dress still neatly folded beside her. The television was off, the room lit only by a small lamp. Her aunt had passed away years ago, but Lily felt as though she was right there beside her, smiling proudly. She replayed the night in her head, the crowd's applause, Daniel's quiet bow the moment her voice filled the hall and the fear disappeared. She had never imagined this. When she first joined his class, she just wanted to learn to sing without shaking. But somewhere along the way, she found more than confidence and she found her truth. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. You did well. The world heard what I've known all along. You have something real. Don't stop now, Lily smiled, tears gathering at the corner of her eyes. She typed back, only because you taught me to believe in it. Then she paused, deleting the last few words. Instead, she sent simply, thank you. Daniel saw the message and chuckled softly. He didn't need more words. The music they had shared said everything already. In the weeks that followed, something beautiful began to happen. A video of Lily's performance had been recorded by one of the students. It spread quietly through the conservatory's social pages, then beyond. People who heard it were moved. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Her voice, trembling with emotion, touched something deep in them. Emails came from small concert organizers. A local radio station played a clip. A music blog called her, the girl whose voice sounds like healing. Daniel watched it all unfold from the sidelines, quietly proud. When Lily came to class one morning, flushed and excited, she blurted, they want me to perform again. They want us to perform. He raised an eyebrow. Us? She grinned. You didn't think I'd go without you, did you? For a moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he laughed. A warm, genuine laugh that surprised even him. You really are impossible, he said. I learned from the best, she replied. And so they performed again. Not in a grand hall this time, but in a smaller, more intimate space. The crowd was close enough that Lily could see their faces, feel their energy. When she sang, it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about sharing something that belonged to both her and Daniel. The story of two people who met through music and helped each other heal. That night, when the final note faded and the audience erupted once again, Daniel didn't hide behind his usual calm expression. He smiled openly. He clapped for her. After the performance, a few young singers approached Lily for advice. She laughed awkwardly at first, unsure how to answer. But Daniel, standing nearby, said softly, tell them the truth. She nodded. The truth is, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to mean it, the crowd smiled. Some even cried. Months passed. The world moved fast, but their friendship and their bond remained steady. Lily began working on her first original album, using songs she had written over the years, including the one that had changed everything. She insisted that Daniel compose the piano arrangements. At first, he refused. I'm too old for all this, he said. You're too good not to, she replied simply. He gave in, and together they spent long nights at the studio, rewriting, laughing, arguing, and creating something that felt bigger than both of them. The album was called The First Note. When it released, it wasn't a commercial explosion, but it touched people deeply. Listeners wrote letters saying her voice reminded them of lost dreams, of second chances, of the way music could pull you out of the dark. Daniel read every letter as if they were written for him. One day, after a long rehearsal, Lily found him sitting quietly at the piano again. What are you thinking? She asked. He looked up, his eyes soft. I was thinking how wrong I was the day you walked into my class, he said. I thought you were just another amateur. She smiled gently. And now? He took a breath. Now I think you're the reason I'm still a musician. The words settled between them, warm and sincere. Lily didn't respond. She just placed her hand lightly on the piano keys beside his, pressing one soft note that echoed through the empty room. That sound, one note, simple and pure, was everything their story had been about. Two people, two lives. One song that changed everything. Daniel leaned back, listening to the echo fade. You know, he said softly, Elena would have loved your voice. Lily smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. Then I hope she's listening. He looked upward, a small smile playing on his lips. She is. Outside, the evening light spilled through the window, wrapping them both in a soft glow. The world beyond the glass moved on, cars, laughter, endless motion. But inside that small room, time stood still. Music had brought them together. Love, not romantic but deep, human, soulful, had kept them there. Lily closed her eyes and whispered, It's funny. You thought I was an amateur, Daniel chuckled, and you thought I didn't care. They both laughed, the sound mingling with the fading notes of their final song. And somewhere between the laughter and the music, The maestro who once doubted and the girl who once trembled found what they'd both been searching for. Not fame, not perfection, but truth. The kind of truth that can only be found in the heart of a song. Of truth that can only be found in the heart of a song.